Excellent. I have a speech of some policies and some things, but I feel like today is a day when we're talking about service and motivations behind why we're all here. And as I researched Rotary International, I'm seeing the values of good character, integrity, leadership. So I'm just going to share a little bit about how I got to where I am and then leave some time for questions. My name is Raul Campillo. I grew up in East County in El Cajon, the Rancho San Diego neighborhood, and I went to Uni High School, something I'm very proud of. The reason I'm most proud of it is because it meant I had to wake up at about 5:45 in the morning, like my dad would. My dad's been an immigration attorney for 40 years. Actually, I've been a poor lawyer. As a lawyer, I have to also say, good morning, Your Honor. I know Judge Gonzalez is here. When there's a judge in the room, you acknowledge it. But no, I had to wake up early and drive in from East County to Linda Vista and really get a sense of, if you're gonna do this, you really gotta do it 100%. And so it's just a lesson I learned from my parents. They grew up in Calexico. They were born in Calexico, grew up in Calexico on both sides of the border of Calexico and Mexicali. My grandfather, he and his three brothers, they started as a small business, taking scrap iron, putting it into a furnace, and turning it into rebar and selling it to American companies back in the 40s and 50s. You wanna talk about sweat equity? That's a furnace. So eventually they took their investment and started a liquor store and a gas station in Calexico. Eventually my dad took his money, his extra investment, and went into business with my grandfather. They started the Denny's in Calexico. Every single step along the way has been a huge risk, but they did it because they knew the upside of taking a risk is the reward if they put the hard work into it. And so I had all these examples, but one of the fundamental things about Calexico is that it's also an agricultural community, and it's where there's a lot of alfalfa, there's a lot of lettuce, and that's where Cesar Chavez would go all over Southern California and Central California and have boycotts and protests for workers. And so my grandfather was one of the few people who stood with Cesar Chavez back in the day, because my grandfather was one of about one or two handfuls of Mexican-American business owners. Sure enough, my aunt met Cesar Chavez's nephew, they got married. I have cousins in the Chavez family, small world. But I always remember that when you see an injustice, you have to stand with it. My father told me, I remember when we were watching Remember the Titans as a little boy, the football film with Denzel Washington, and people would drive by and throw a brick through his window. My dad said, oh, people did that to our window when we were growing up because we would have Cesar Chavez over our house. And so I grew up with these stories of these legends really in my mind of what you should do with your skills. And so going to uni was a huge thing for me, really putting in that effort. I graduated valedictorian and went to Harvard for undergrad, and I cared about science and math. Those were the things that actually fascinated me the most, but I really cared about government. I remember as a little kid saying, it's more important for me to go into public service than to be the second baseman of the San Diego Padres, because I love baseball too. But all in all, I knew that I had to live up to a legacy that came before me. And so when I went to Harvard, I studied government, got involved in campaigns, knocked on doors, learned how to talk to people, worked in presidential primaries, worked in congressional districts, and really fundamentally learned something that helps me to this day in my job as a council member. Just talk to people. Just stop and talk to people, and you will realize that our humanity binds us so closely that we will be able to figure out what we need to do to get ahead. People can disagree on all sorts of national politics, but really people in District 7, which is from Linda Vista to San Carlos, Tierra Santa, and Mission Valley, they just want to see their infrastructure repaired. So I've spent a ton of time emphasizing infrastructure investment. They want to see the police show up faster to their homes. So let's invest in more police officers so we can cut down those response times, because they're responding to heart attacks just as much as they're responding to a break-in. Let's invest in the roads. Did I say the roads yet? Everybody has their pothole. Sharon, Sarah Mesa, potholes. And guess what? We fill potholes. But I also know from my grandfather and my father's example is, you don't ask anybody to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. So I've done a 24-hour ride along with firefighters. Where can I stand better? Right here. Random. I've done a 24-hour ride along with the firefighters where I slept overnight in their bunks right next to them, answered the call in the middle of the night. I've done that twice. Been 5 or 6 ride-alongs with the police department going from 9 p.m. until 6, 7 a.m. I've gone out to the Point Loma water treatment facility to see what we're doing to keep our water clean and protect the environment, but also deal with what happens when you flush the toilet. It's really an important thing, and the little, who are they? The Boy Scouts love it when I say, what's the thing that keeps you up, Councilmember Campillo? I say, making sure the toilets work, and they laugh, and the parents are like, yeah, that's right. And so I've made sure that as a council member, I get out there and see exactly what it is I am budgeting for and what I am asking city staff to do, and that I'm willing to be there early in the morning, late at night, just like them, to see how it gets done, because a lot of folks will criticize and all that other stuff. I want them to know they have the support of someone who's behind them. Of course, you gotta hold them accountable for when things don't go correctly, but fundamentally, I don't ask anybody to do something that I wouldn't do myself. That's another lesson in leadership from my grandfather and my father. Ultimately, I became a public school teacher after Harvard, got my degree from UNLV at night, and was teaching 5th grade in a public school in North Las Vegas. Did that for a few years, went back to Harvard Law School, and knew I was gonna come back to California. It was always to come back to California and always to come back to San Diego. And so 3.5 years after working at O'Melveny and Myers in Los Angeles and downtown LA, I knew it was time to come home. And had a couple options, and looked around and said, what's the legal job for me? And I ended up sitting in front of Mara Elliott on June 5th, 2018 for my final interview. And she said, Raul, you need to come to the city attorney's office, because I've read your cover letter, and we help people like your brother, because 4 or 5 years before that, my brother had died from an opioid overdose. And that's before the 2016 presidential campaign really made it a big issue that the media picked up on. And now we know that back then 70,000, 80,000, now it's closer to 100,000 people are dying from fentanyl, opioid, drug overdoses. And so my brother was, he was smarter than me, he was better looking than me, but he had a biological issue that I don't have, and that's why he ended up with his fate. Mara Elliott read my letter and said, you need to come here because we help people like your brother. And sure enough, I said, that's what I want to do. I'm gonna go be a prosecutor at the criminal division in the city attorney's office. And that was one of the best jobs I think I will ever have. I love being a council member, but I do see Mara in the hallway every once in a while and say, can I please just prosecute one more DUI case? It's great being in trial. All lawyers will know that. It's nerve-wracking, but it's fun. But fundamentally, I did that to help people like my brother, because I really do believe on Ash Wednesday that we have to be our brother's keeper. We have to be our sister's keeper. For those who cannot control something because of their biology, because of their history, whatever it is, we gotta look out for people. And so that's what I did in that job. That's what I feel like I'm doing as a council member as well. I ran because working in the city, you see how bureaucracy works. You want to improve that as much as possible, but you also see how policy is made, and we need to really improve how that gets done. So I felt like I brought the tools, I brought the skills, I brought my education, but fundamentally, that part of my heart that says, be your brother's keeper. Funny enough, we get a voicemail about 3 months ago from a young man that I prosecuted 3-4 years ago for a drug crime. He called up and said, Councilmember Campillo, you don't need to call me back, but I want you to know that I see the time that you prosecuted me and offered me a diversion program and this probationary way out of it as an act of redemption for me and not an act of punishment for me. And so now I'm a first-year law student, and I'm gonna try to be a prosecutor because of the way you treated me. I don't remember that person coming through. I remember his name just a little bit because it's a familiar name that I had friends who had that name, but I didn't remember him personally. I just knew that at that moment it vindicated the whole reason I came home. So that's what I'm trying to do as a city council member. That's what I'm gonna continue to do, whether or not I continue to get reelected or I stay in politics. And I know that the Rotarians really live up to these 3 values, and I want you to know that I have those 3 values, and it's my honor to be here with you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions about anything related to the city, but I want you to know what you have all done for 108 years. And how long has this chapter been around?
92?
33?
90? Is that our 90? 90 or 92.
Okay, well, I'm 34, so it got 1 year on me, right? 1 less year on me. But I just want you to know how much I appreciate you, my constituents appreciate you. It takes a lot to take your volunteer time and support groups like the homeless, support students, support the city, support little leagues, churches, everything like that. It really, really takes a lot of time and effort, but it shows your heart and that the Rotarians are really your brothers and sisters keepers. So thank you for having me here.
Oh, thank you, Councilmember. All right, I'll remind everyone in the room that we have to stay on the mics for our Zoom family. So who has a question for our council member? Oh, President-elect Martha does.
So you're on the River Commission?
I am on the San Diego River Conservancy.
Conservancy. So going through Mission Valley.
Yes, all the way from OB, all the way up into the county at the headwaters near Julian.
With all of the development that's going on in Mission Valley, I know the stadium, what's happening on the river to like get it out of the weeds, as it were?
Oh, for sure. No, that's absolutely right. One of the first things that I did when I was elected is I got in contact with Supervisor Nathan Fletcher to say, hey, I have an idea, but it's going to require some tax money, and the county has more of it. He said, we're already ahead of you. We've been thinking about this for a while. He, I, and Mayor Gloria's team had several meetings in a row in the early part of 2021 to come up with a plan. The plan is this. The county has contracted with a consultant to draw what's called an Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District. It's a special financing vehicle through state law that will allow tax increment to be dedicated to a particularly drawn piece of land. In essence, it'll be like a joint powers authority between City of San Diego, County of San Diego, and hopefully the City of Santee will join in because they would be the other necessary party. But I think that they're happy to see the money spent in that way. And so what ends up happening is that a portion of the tax increment will be set aside into a particular bank account to make sure that we have environmental protection, we have stormwater and infrastructure repairs, that we can dedicate some of that to housing as well. And so it's that consultant has, I believe, been contracted already. It takes a while to put out the RFP and get everything in line, but I anticipate that over the next 3-4 years, we're gonna have a solid plan that says, this is what we're gonna finance and this is how we're gonna execute it, and here's where the money's gonna come from, which is always the hard part in government, but that's a great question. And last but not least, just part of that will go to make sure we help the homeless individuals who are camping in the river. I just did a point in time count in Grantville, right under where Friars Road crosses over the river. We interacted with about 40 people on both sides of the 8 and then the 15 right there. So there's a lot of people who need help, and part of that money will go to help them get services and hopefully move out of the riverbed and into shelter.